You don't need muscles to become a legend, you just need enough silence not to step back. The dumbbells hit the floor with a hollow clunk, plastic against hardwood, too light to matter, too loud to ignore. Noah stood frozen in the center of the gym, shoulders stiff, fists clenched at his sides. Around him, the sound grew, first whispers, then laughter, then the amplified crackle of Coach Richter's voice over the mic. "Let's see what Mr. Olympia Jr. can do," he said, gesturing with theatrical flair. The students erupted. Some leaned forward, phones half raised. Others jeered from the bleachers, already savoring the humiliation before it happened. "Come on, lift it like Grandpa would," someone shouted. A voice from the far side added, "Do the Terminator pose." Noah didn't flinch. He stepped forward, picked up the pink training dumbbells with both hands. They were meant for warm-ups, not for proving legacies. He crouched, planted his feet, then lifted them up, elbows bent at 90 degrees like he'd seen in the mirror at home 1,000 times. But this time, the room tilted. One dumbbell tipped, then his balance wavered. His foot caught slightly on the polished floor. A stumble, not a fall, but close enough. Laughter burst from the bleachers like a dam breaking. One student mimed a bodybuilder collapsing. Another shouted, "Mini Arnold flexed and flopped." Even Coach Richter chuckled into the microphone. "A little early to skip leg day, don't you think?" he quipped. Noah straightened slowly, the dumbbells still in his hands. His face didn't change. No anger. No shame. Just stillness, like a stone refusing to be moved by waves. He set the dumbbells down with deliberate care, not dropped, not flung, but placed. The silence inside him was heavier than anything in the room. He turned and walked toward the bleachers, each step steady, deliberate, as the laughter followed behind him like a shadow he wouldn't acknowledge. Coach Richter clapped his hands as if dismissing the moment. "All right, folks, give it up for Noah, our future fitness influencer." Someone in the front row pretended to wipe away tears of laughter. Another leaned in and whispered, "Next time he should try cardboard weights. Might match the legacy." Noah sat without responding. Mia, 2 rows behind, watched him but said nothing. Even she didn't know what to do with a moment like that, when someone doesn't break, but doesn't fight either. When they simply hold. Later, someone would upload the video with the caption, "Schwarzenegger 2.0 has a system error." But in that moment, surrounded by the echo of mockery and the scent of gym floor polish, Noah's silence was louder than all of them. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. By second period, the video had already been trimmed, captioned, and shared. 10 seconds long. No sound needed. Just a boy wobbling under 2 pink dumbbells, stumbling, setting them down, and walking off like someone had unplugged him. The caption read, "Baby Terminator malfunctions." By third period, screenshots had replaced lockers magnets, taped next to schedules and practice lists. Someone added a speech bubble. "I'll be back, after leg day." Another crafted a fake ad. "Introducing Mr. Olympia Jr., now an extra soft." Noah's desk had a laminated version of it waiting when he walked into history class. He didn't look at it. He folded it in half once, then again, until it disappeared in his palm. Mia hadn't said a word. She avoided his eyes in the hallway, pretending to dig through her bag when they passed each other. At lunch, a group at the far table raised water bottles like dumbbells and grunted dramatically before laughing. Someone dropped a protein bar beside Noah's tray. "Gotta bulk up, right?" The bar rolled once, bumped against his apple, and stopped. Noah didn't touch it. Coach Richter, standing by the teacher's lounge door, laughed with a colleague. "He actually tried to lift them seriously," he said, shaking his head. "Gotta admire the commitment." The other teacher chuckled. "Maybe he thinks legacy's genetic." Richter shrugged. "Kid's got imagination, I'll give him that. Either that or one hell of a bedtime story." A few feet away, the janitor silently wheeled his cart past them, eyes locked forward, the handle gripped just a little too tightly. By the time the final bell rang, Noah's name had become a cue for chuckles. A student in the art wing had sketched a comic strip and tacked it to the announcement board. A cartoon Noah flexing in front of a mirror that reflected a stick figure. The last panel was a dumbbell labeled, "Truth," flattening him like a pancake. The caption said, "Some weights are too honest to lift." Noah passed it without slowing down. His steps didn't speed up, but they didn't falter either. He walked home like every sound had been turned down, like the world was trying to hum beneath his skin but couldn't find the frequency. When he reached his front door, he paused. The handle was cold, the wood slightly damp from the afternoon air. He went inside without a word. Upstairs, the light in his room stayed off. From the hallway, only the faint rustling of paper could be heard. Pages turned, not in a rush, but one after the other slowly, like he was reading something that needed to hurt. Downstairs, the dryer buzzed once, then fell silent. Arnold didn't call up to him. He just sat at the kitchen table, unmoving, a glass of water untouched before him, the edges of his thoughts sharp as iron left out in the rain. The next morning, Noah moved like someone learning how to inhabit their own body again. His footsteps were softer, his shoulders drawn inward as if to shrink the space he occupied. At breakfast, he poured cereal into the bowl without looking, letting the flakes spill over the side until they scratched against the table. Milk followed in a thin, unsteady stream. He didn't eat. Across from him, Arnold sat in silence, coffee cooling in front of him, arms folded, gaze level but not invasive. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The quiet between them was neither awkward nor cold. It was weighted, like the silence shared between two men carrying different parts of the same load. Noah finished nothing on his plate. He stood, carried the bowl to the sink, rinsed it without sound, and left. Outside, the air held the chill of late fall, sharp but not cruel. Leaves crunched under his shoes as he walked the side yard toward the back gate. But just before reaching it, he stopped. His eyes had caught the small, familiar sliver of gray hanging behind the laundry room door, the tank top. It had been there for years, always untouched. The fabric was worn thin near the collar, one strap frayed like it had been chewed by time. A stain darkened the lower edge, oil or sweat, maybe both. It didn't look impressive. It didn't sparkle. But it carried a kind of quiet authority, like a veteran medal left in a drawer rather than on display. Noah stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame. He didn't step inside. He just stared. The light from the small window caught the dust motes drifting in the air around it. For a moment, nothing moved. Then he reached out, not to take it, but to trace a line near the hem, where the threading had begun to unravel. His fingers hovered an inch away, paused, and then dropped. He turned, walked out through the gate, and didn't look back. At school, the jokes continued, but softer now, as if repetition had dulled their edge. He ignored them all. Not because he was stronger, but because the noise no longer reached him the same way. He sat through classes, took notes, but his gaze often drifted. Once during study hall, he opened his notebook, not the school one, but the old one he kept hidden between textbooks. Inside, page after page, handwritten sets, chest, back, legs, date after date, like a monk recording prayers. At the top corner of one, written in block letters with a dull pencil, August 5, 1983, 80 reps, 110 pounds, failed at 74. Tried again. Made it. Noah stared at that line for a long time. His thumb brushed the edge of the paper, smudging graphite. He closed the notebook slowly, slid it back between the covers of his history book, and returned to silence. Behind his eyes, something stayed awake. Not anger. Not revenge. Just something unshaken, waiting. The sound of the toaster popping broke the stillness in the kitchen, but neither of them moved. Noah sat at the table, his elbows tucked in, spoons circling the rim of his bowl without ever reaching his mouth. Arnold, across from him, folded the newspaper but didn't read it. His gaze rested somewhere beyond the surface of the table, like he was watching something that had already happened. Noah's eyes were red, not from sleep, but from holding too much in for too long. Arnold noticed, but he didn't name it. He reached for his coffee, took a slow sip, then said, almost like clearing his throat, "They laughed?" Noah didn't answer at first. Then, barely audible, he nodded. Arnold set the cup down without a sound. "Did you stop?" Another pause. A second nod, no hesitation this time. Arnold's jaw flexed once, a quiet gesture of approval. "Then your training has begun," he said, voice low, as if the words weren't meant for the air, only for the boy in front of him. Later, after Noah had left for school, the old man moved through the house without hurry. His footsteps were solid, not heavy, like someone used to the weight of his own presence. He passed through the hallway, down the narrow steps to the garage, where the air smelled of rust and old oil. Dust swirled when he opened the locker near the far wall. Inside, tucked behind a crate of extension cords and forgotten hand tools, was a thick metal case, stamped on the corner, Austria 1968. He pulled it free, set it on the workbench, and opened the lid. The inside was lined with flannel so old it had thinned in patches. On top sat a pair of steel dumbbells, their grips worn smooth, their ends marked by small hand-etched notches. He lifted one gently, as if it still carried the memory of 1,000 repetitions. His thumb traced the engraved letters along the bar. "Pain is temporary. Quitting is forever." The words weren't for inspiration, they were a warning. Beneath the dumbbells lay a folded tank top, faded gray, the same one hanging in the laundry room. But this one wasn't for show. It was stained, torn at the collar, the front marked with faint numbers written in black marker, weights, sets, failure points. At the very bottom was a worn black leather notebook, spine cracked, corners curled. Arnold opened it slowly. The pages held numbers, yes, but also small notes. "Back tight today, rest. Too much ego, lower the weight. Hit 300 pounds. Nobody clapped. Good." He read them in silence, fingers hovering over words like they were old wounds. Then he closed the case, not as someone hiding something, but preserving it. He sat on the edge of the workbench, looking down at his hands. They were no longer calloused, but they remembered. He looked toward the stairs, where faint daylight slanted down through the doorframe. "One day," he muttered to no one, "he'll understand that lifting has never been about who watches." Then he reached over, placed the dumbbell back in the case, and shut the lid. It clicked with finality. By the time Thursday morning rolled around, the atmosphere in the gym had shifted from amusement to anticipation. Not the kind that lifted hearts, but the kind that twisted knives. Coach Richter stood at center court like a ringmaster, clipboard in one hand, whistle dangling like a medal of misplaced authority. "All right, people," he called, voice booming through the mic. "Let's give a warm welcome to our very own legacy in motion, Noah Schwarzenegger." The name echoed through the gym like a dare. A few scattered claps followed, but they sounded more like mock applause than support. From the sidelines, someone coughed the word "Terminator" under their breath. Another whispered, "Hope the dumbbells survived." Noah stood near the back of the bleachers, unmoving. He didn't look at anyone. When Richter gestured with exaggerated flair and tossed a pair of old resistance bands toward the center of the court, they landed in a coiled mess by the free throw line. "Don't worry," the coach quipped. "No weights this time. Just want to see the genetics at work." Laughter spilled across the court, hungry and rehearsed. Noah walked down the bleachers without a word. Each step was steady, not slow, but not rushed. He picked up the bands, held them in both hands for a moment, then knelt to lay them down gently on the hardwood. He didn't stretch them. Didn't pose. Didn't perform. He simply stood in the center of the court, his back straight, his hands at his sides, like a monument they hadn't meant to build. Coach Richter tried to fill the silence. "Come on, Noah. Nothing? Not even a flex?" He mimicked a bicep curl, grinning. "Your grandfather would have put on a show by now. Guess all we get is posture." He chuckled into the mic. "Maybe he's demonstrating mental strength. That's a thing, right?" Noah didn't move. His gaze was fixed ahead, not at the coach, not at the crowd, at the far wall, where the scoreboard buzzed faintly, counting down a game no one was playing. The gym grew quieter, not out of respect, but out of confusion. The kind of stillness that creeps in when people expect a punchline and realize it might not come. Finally, Noah turned, walked back toward the bleachers, and sat down. No reaction. No explanation. Just a boy who refused to make himself smaller, even when every eye asked him to. One student muttered, "Guess that's the Schwarzenegger workout. Stand still and wait for applause." A few others laughed, unsure if they were supposed to. Coach Richter cleared his throat, shuffled his clipboard. "Well, that was enlightening. Moving on." Noah didn't flinch. He stared down at his shoes, breathing evenly. He hadn't lifted anything that day, not bands, not weights, but he had carried something far heavier through that gym. And while no one clapped, no one could deny the silence had changed shape. It wasn't absence anymore. It was presence. And it was holding its ground. The gym was louder than usual that morning, not with cheers, but with noise meant to fill space. Folding chairs scraped the floor. A Bluetooth speaker somewhere near the front spat out a pop remix no one listened to. Students shuffled in, bored or buzzing, wearing color-coded t-shirts for day 4 of athletic week. Coach Richter stood off to the side, fixing his hair in the reflection of the scoreboard glass, clipboard tucked under his arm like it held something important. He checked his watch, smirked at nothing in particular, then stepped up to the center mic. "All right, let's wake up a little. We've got fitness demos, guest speakers, and maybe, just maybe, a surprise or two." He paused for effect, let the silence stretch, then added with a crooked grin, "Heard a rumor Mr. Olympia might send his spirit guide." A few kids chuckled. One clapped slowly, ironically. Others craned their necks toward the doors, waiting for the next act in a joke they thought they knew the punchline to. But when the gym doors opened, no one spoke. There was no music. No announcement. Just footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Measured. A man entered, not rushed, not timid, just certain. Denim jacket. Black boots. Weathered duffel bag in one hand. In the other, nothing but silence. Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. The room adjusted around him. He crossed the court like the floor remembered him, the hush following like it owed him something. Coach Richter blinked twice, as if trying to decide if this was real or a prank gone too far. Arnold stopped at the scorer's table, knelt with a controlled precision that came not from age but from purpose. He unzipped the duffel slowly. No one moved. Inside, he pulled out a small, leather-bound training log, its edges frayed, cover soft with time. Then a faded bronze medal, its ribbon creased and faded. And finally, a rolled-up tank top, gray and stained, folded with more care than ceremony. He laid them out side by side, like artifacts, not trophies. Then he stood. For the first time, he looked at the crowd. Not searching for someone, just letting them look back. No smile. No speech. Just presence. Someone in the third row whispered, "Is that really?" but stopped themselves. Another student raised their phone halfway, then lowered it, like instinct lost to reverence. Coach Richter took one step forward. "Mr. Schwarzenegger, this is unexpected," he said, voice thin. Arnold glanced at him, expression unreadable, then back at the table. He tapped the edge of the medal once, softly, and said, "I didn't come to perform." His voice was calm. Steady. "I came to return what's been misused." Then he turned to the students, eyes moving slowly across them, not to intimidate, but to see. Truly see. No slogans. No posturing. Just proof. The kind that didn't need to explain itself. The kind that had already done the work, rep by silent rep. And then he walked off the court, leaving behind nothing flashy, only weight. And not one person laughed. Not this time. The door to the coach's office clicked shut behind him. The overhead light flickered once before settling into a dull buzz. Coach Richter stood near the window, still holding the clipboard though he hadn't looked at it in 10 minutes. His coffee had gone cold. The echo of the gym still pulsed behind his eyes, No cheers, no jokes, just the image of a man laying down a medal and saying nothing more than he had to. When the second knock came, it wasn't sharp. It was deliberate. The kind that doesn't ask for permission, only announces arrival. The handle turned. Arnold stepped in without waiting to be invited. He wore no jacket now. Just a black button-down, sleeves rolled, forearms marked with faint, silver scars of old effort. He didn't speak immediately. He looked around the room like he recognized it, not specifically, but in shape, same desk, same window, same man who once believed shouting was a form of control. Coach Richter cleared his throat. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it," he said, voice lower than usual. "It was all in good fun. The kids, they just ran with it." "You led," Arnold said. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. "You laughed first. That's all the permission they needed." Richter shifted, his hand tightening around the edge of the clipboard. "I didn't know who he was. I didn't know you were." He stopped himself, then added, "I didn't think it was true." Arnold took one step closer. Not a threat, just presence. "You didn't think he was lying," he said. "You thought it might be true, and that scared you more. Because truth without your control makes you smaller." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was layered, humiliation, guilt, maybe even something sharper beneath. Richter looked down at the floor. He didn't even defend himself. He muttered. Just stood there. Arnold nodded once. "And you made a room out of that silence. Then you filled it with your voice." His tone didn't rise, but it pressed down. Coach Richter leaned back against the desk. "He embarrassed himself," he said softer now. "He just stood there." Arnold's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in clarity. "You think that was weakness?" That boy stood when it would have been easier to run. He carried every sneer, every laugh, every inch of your performance, without breaking. He paused. "You performed strength." He lived it. There was no rebuttal. Only the hum of the lights and the weight of something being unlearned. Arnold turned toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. "You like being the loudest man in the room," he said without looking back. "That usually means you're the one who listens least." Then he stepped out. The door didn't slam. It closed like a statement, not punctuation, but correction. And for the first time that week, Coach Richter didn't have anything clever to say. By Monday morning, the hallway outside the gym had changed. No announcement. No ribbon. No signature from the principal or donation plaque from some local sponsor. Just a small wooden box mounted to the cinderblock wall, framed by nothing but silence. It hadn't been there Friday afternoon when students had rushed past with backpacks flung over one shoulder, too eager for weekend freedom to notice anything that didn't speak loudly. But now it was impossible not to see. Inside the glass sat a pair of dumbbells, iron, not rubber, not for play. The knurled grips were worn smooth. One was wrapped near the center with a strip of duct tape that had darkened with sweat over the years. Beside them, folded neatly, was a gray tank top, frayed at the edges, the collar pulled thin, a faded stain curling across the chest like a shadow that refused to wash out. Below them, mounted on brushed steel, a small brass plate read, "Legacy isn't in the weight you lift. It's in how you carry what no one sees." There was no explanation. No photograph. No signature. Just the presence of things that had clearly been used and used hard, left behind not to impress, but to remain. No one noticed it by accident. He was carrying cones from the storage room, arms full, half-focused, walking the path he always walked, until something about the wall felt different. He stopped mid-step. For a moment, the hallway noise blurred. Conversations thinned. The clatter of lockers dulled. His gaze fixed on the box. He didn't move closer. Didn't press his hand to the glass. Just looked. And looked. The tank top wasn't identical to the one in the laundry room, but it belonged to the same history. The dumbbells, he recognized the tape, the small rust pit along the base. These weren't replicas. These were lived in. Behind him, the school began to shift. A group of students passed, slowed, glanced at the display. One of them whispered something, but it wasn't cruel this time. Another just nodded, like they understood something they didn't know how to say. Noah turned to leave, but then paused, looked once more, as if memorizing the placement of each item, not to prove anything, but to remember that it had been remembered. Later in class, someone asked if it was real. If the weights were actually his grandfather's. Noah didn't answer. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just looked out the window, one hand resting on the edge of his desk like he was still holding something. And that afternoon, as the hallway emptied, the light from the west-facing windows hit the brass plate just right, making the engraved words shimmer faintly, like breath on steel. And the display didn't shine, it endured. Noah walked the hallways the same way he always had, head level, steps even, but something beneath his stride had shifted. The stairs hadn't vanished, but they no longer carried teeth. They glanced, not to mock, but to gauge. No one stuck out a foot anymore. No one whispered, "Terminator," under their breath. The silence around him had changed tone, no longer a wall to keep him out, but a space people didn't know how to fill. On his way to class, a younger boy walked up beside him, matched his pace for 3 steps, then held out a folded piece of notebook paper. "I drew it," the boy mumbled. "The thing on the wall." Noah took it without a word. Inside was a rough sketch, 2 dumbbells, a tank top, and a line of text he hadn't seen on the real display. This stuff belonged to someone real. He didn't smile. He folded the paper again and kept walking. At lunch, Mia sat down across from him without asking. No crowd followed. No cameras. Just her. She looked at him for a while, arms folded on the table, then finally said, "It's quieter." He nodded once. She tilted her head. "Why didn't he say anything?" Noah didn't answer right away. He looked past her, out the wide cafeteria windows, where the sky hung low and gray like a held breath. "He doesn't live for applause," Noah said finally. "He never did." Mia picked at the corner of her tray. "But he could have shut everyone up in 1 second. Just said something." Noah's voice was quiet but sure. "He doesn't need to." He looked at her steady. "He built himself so he wouldn't have to explain anything." She didn't argue. Instead, she leaned back, exhaled through her nose, and said, "I didn't believe you either." "Not really." Noah didn't flinch. "I know." She blinked, surprised by the lack of sting in his tone. "Does it bother you?" He shook his head. "It's not your belief that makes it real." The bell rang. Students scraped chairs, shuffled trays. Noah stood, picked up his backpack, and paused. He used to say, he murmured, "Truth isn't a weight you lift once and drop. It's the one you carry forever." Quietly. Then he walked off, leaving Mia to sit with the echo of a sentence heavier than anything in the gym. That afternoon, as the last class ended and students spilled into the hallway, a new addition had appeared beside the display box, just a small card, taped to the wall. In plain handwriting it read, "This was never about lifting. It was about holding on." No one claimed responsibility. No one had to. A few students stopped and read it. One girl took a picture. No one laughed. No one scoffed. They just stood there for a moment, like maybe they were starting to understand what it meant to carry something you couldn't see. The porch creaked beneath Arnold's weight as he eased into the old wooden chair, the kind that had outlasted more winters than it should have. The sky was thinning into dusk, bleeding orange at the edges, the kind of color that made silence feel earned. Noah stepped out barefoot, glass of water in one hand, a folded piece of paper in the other. He didn't speak as he sat beside his grandfather. They didn't need to talk much anymore. Still, after a long pause, Noah unfolded the paper and held it out. It was the same sketch the younger boy had given him earlier that week, the dumbbells, the tank top, and the words, "This stuff belonged to someone real." Arnold looked at it, then at Noah, then leaned back slowly, letting the moment settle. For a while, they just listened, to the wind brushing the trees, the occasional hum of a distant lawnmower, the quiet that lived between people who had been tested and hadn't crumbled. Then Noah asked, his voice steady, "What does legacy mean to you?" Arnold didn't answer right away. He looked out across the yard, past the fence, as if searching for something he'd buried long ago and never bothered to dig up again. "It's not trophies," he said finally. "Not medals. Not applause." He rubbed his fingers together, like feeling the ghost of chalk from an old barbell. "Legacy's the last rep, the one no one sees. The one you don't want to do. But you do it anyway." Noah nodded like he understood, even if part of him didn't. Yet. Upstairs, in Noah's room, the belt still sat untouched on his desk. Next to it, the training notebook was open, a fresh page already marked. "Back 4 sets, go slow." And beside that, a new sketch, one he hadn't shown anyone. It was simple, the school hallway empty. On one wall, the glass case with the dumbbells and the tank top. On the opposite side, a lone figure walking past, head up, hands loose at his sides. No flexing. No spotlight. Just motion. Real. Quiet. Unapologetic. The next day, Noah passed the display again, but he didn't stop. A second-grade girl stood in front of it, her backpack too big for her frame. She pointed through the glass and whispered to her friend, "That's his grandpa. He's real." Noah kept walking. He didn't smile. He didn't turn around. But something in his shoulders, straight, but at ease, spoke for him. Behind him, the weights stayed where they were, untouched, unmoved. Not because no one cared, but because they didn't have to prove anything anymore. Some truths, once lived, don't echo, they anchor. And some names, once carried with enough silence, become louder than any cheer ever could. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.